Hey, this is Brock from Eelcrest Studios, and today I'm going to be showing you how you can make a beautiful woven cutting board. Now, this is one of those things where it looks really complicated, but it really is not once you learn the steps on how to do it. So let's get started. The first thing I'm doing here is I put the two pieces of wood together and I want to stack them so the corners are touching each other. What I'm doing now is tracing a general line that I want to cut, and this is going to be the woven part of the cutting board. Now I want to point out here that you can use any pieces of wood. On the top I have a solid piece of black walnut, and on the bottom I have a couple strips of different pieces of wood, which is maple, walnut, I think I have a little bit of cherry in there as well, but the choice is really yours. Now I want to point out here is you want to make sure you clamp it firmly so it doesn't move, and then from there just use your jigsaw and you're able to cut this pretty easily. The only issue I ran into here is, as you can see, I have plywood underneath and I accidentally clipped that towards the end. So it kind of gave my my piece a little jolt, which is not really the end of the world, but just one of those things. Make sure you know where you're cutting at because you don't want to cut a wire or your finger by accident. Now for this next part here, I just cut right through the entire piece, and so you can see the top part pops off, but I have to cut that longer piece at the bottom just because it's a longer piece. It's pretty straightforward. So we're going to go over to the chop saw and just give it a quick cut to make sure it's nice and smooth, and then we should be all set. Once we do this, you'll see we have 4 pieces that we can use to make the woven part of the cutting board. Now I like to lay it out here, and this is a little bit of a longer clip. I want to show you all the different options you have. So you can see your ends are only going to match up a specific way because of how you cut the board. So you don't really have to worry about labeling your pieces and number them because they're only going to fit one way, and that's the only way you can fit them up. Let me know if that makes sense. I know it might be a little bit confusing. But as you can see here, we have 2 different combos. So basically what we're going to end up with is one piece of solid black walnut attached to the stripe board, and then the other piece, as you can see, is going to be the stripe board attached to the smaller piece of black walnut. Now you can keep these boards just like this, but I'm going to repeat this process one more time and kind of show you why I want to do that. Now a cool thing about this is you can actually add another piece in between. So you see I have this purple heart here, which I really like. And what I'm going to be doing is cutting a very thin strip of this using my table saw, and we're actually going to put this in between the 2 pieces. What this is going to do is add a nice unique color to this, and also you can make it actually a little bit stronger because if you have any gaps in your wood, if you didn't get a perfect cut, you can use this piece to help solidify that and have a nice tight bond. Now you can see I almost lost it there, but thankfully it's okay. So now this next part here, as I talked about, we're going to glue this up, and I'm using Type On 3 glue. I found this is the best for cutting boards. You can always use different ones, but this one is water resistant and I believe also safe to eat on, but I would always check the labels as you do with anything you're possibly consuming. So we added glue to both sides of the board, and then what we're going to do here is just put that thin strip that we cut of the purple heart and clamp it up. Now you want to make sure you have a nice tight fit, use a lot of glue, and make sure you squeeze your clamps tight because this board, that piece of purple heart, does not want to be moved. It wants to stay straight. So if you have it loose, it's going to bend, could possibly pop out later. So make sure it's nice and tight. Give it at least 24 hours to dry. You're going to see for these pieces, I gave them actually 2 days to dry just because it's a little bit colder where I was at. So you want to make sure it's nice and solidified before you move on to the next step because you don't want your pieces falling apart 3 months, 4 months, a year down the line. Now the cool thing about this project is that it's going to look really neat in the end, but as you can see, it doesn't take too long to do, and it kind of creates some cool features and can really impress people even as a beginner woodworker. So now that we have both the boards glued together, all we need to do is flatten them to make sure they're level. So I'm just using my hand planer here, and this took about 20 minutes, but I'm only showing you about 20 seconds of what I had to do. Once they're both planed up, you can see now that we can start to put them together. Now we could glue up the board like this, but I want to do one more cut and one more basket weave because I think it's going to look a lot better. So what I'm doing now is just clamping the 2 pieces together as I did before and drawing another line. But this time I want to go in the opposite direction, and what this will do is it will allow me to get that basket weave that I want, and it will look like the boards are coming out of nowhere when it comes to the straight boards and the black walnut. So once again, just using the jigsaw here to give it a cut. Now I did have a little bit of an issue where I got my blade pinched a little bit, so I had to stop and restart. This isn't really a big deal, but ideally you can go through this process without stopping because it just makes a better cut and is actually a little bit cleaner and less issues to deal with later on. Now that we're all cut up, you can see we now have 4 different pieces, and now the last part is just to glue these up. Now I didn't show it in any of the videos, but I also cut another piece of that purple heart to add in here as well, and the reason why I did this is just because I thought it looked cool. I wanted to make sure it was something that's kind of unique. I've seen some of these boards out there, and they can be good, but they're a little bit plain, so I thought this purple heart would make a good little combo, good little addition to the group. So what I did here is just glued on both sides and started clamping up my pieces. And then you can see I actually have a book match mark in the center with the original edge of my striped piece of wood and then the original edge of my black walnut. Once again, all of this is really your choice. The cool part about this is you can get a little creative and see what you like best and see what works good. Now when you're clamping this up, you want to make sure everything is aligned because you don't want to have any waste when it comes to these boards. Once we get this, you can see it's clamped up nice and tight. We'll let it sit for another 24 hours, and then we'll go back and cut off the edges and get it cleaned up for the final reveal. Now the thing to note is each time you end up gluing these boards, you do have to plane them to make sure they're on the same level. So you will lose a little bit of thickness, but it's really not that big of a deal. So just make sure you're aware of that when you're making your board. Now right here, I'm just going back to the chop saw and I want to get a nice edge on each side. So I'm cutting off the edges just because we had a little bit of overhang between the boards on each side. And then once we do this, we're just going to be going to the sanding part and also rounding over the edges, which I really enjoy and I think it looks great. Now for the sanding, I'm going from 80 to 100 to 150 grit. This is one of those things where it does take a little bit of time, but once you do it properly, it's going to look really, really nice. It's going to help if there's any deviations in your wood because you can sand it out. And then also when we add the mineral oil at the end, it's going to make it a lot smoother. It's really going to make the colors pop. And overall, it's just going to make the piece look good, last a long time, and just be really professional looking. The one thing I'd have to say about this is that you want to make sure you keep your sandpaper moving when you're going throughout the process. This really isn't a hard thing to do. You just want to make sure you don't have any flat spots or any divots in your pieces of wood if you let it sit there for too long. So just make sure you cover the entire piece. I know some people will go over with a pencil to make sure they're covering everything. That's also a good option as well. I just kind of kept track of where I was going, but anyone can do whatever they want. So this last part here is the router part. So I want to give this a 1/4 inch round over bit, and I use that because if you have a square or sharp edges on your cutting board, if you drop it, hit it with a knife, bump into it, it can actually break off, and then your piece is kind of ruined. It's not really the end of the world, but if you give just a little bit of a round over on your sharp edges, it can really help preserve the wood and make sure it lasts a long time. Now the corners can be a little bit tricky. I like to go over lightly and then retrace my steps a few different times. So you can see I went back and forth a few different times here. And here's another corner where I just did that exact same thing. It makes it a lot easier and you help prevent any blowout from happening. Now for this last part, I just grabbed a piece of 240 sandpaper, and then what I did is I just went over lightly by hand. This isn't absolutely necessary, but I found it gets off any last minute burrs that come from the routing and also any sanding that you may have missed. Now for the last part, you want to add the mineral oil, and this is my favorite part. I almost ran out here, so thankfully I just had enough, but this is where you can see the paper really, really pop, and you can see the color just really come out, and I love that black walnut, how bright that is. And you'll notice there's a little bit of a rock when it came to this, and I thought my piece of wood was bent, but when I picked it up, I found there was a piece of glue sticking at the bottom, so once I shaved that off, we had a nice flat board, and we were all set. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if there's any questions.